different categories. I think 52,000 brands all around the world. Every 6 months or so, they assess them. And one of the things that historically, it's fascinating to me. I imagine there's a lot of people involved in brand building listening to this, but one of the things that they've said historically was that the way they talk to us about challenges, for example, is that to be a big brand leader, you need to have esteem and knowledge. So people need to know about you, knowledge, and they need to see you as knowledgeable about your category, and they need to hold you in high regard. And that's, fairly self-evident, but the great brands, Mercedes-Benz, you might point to some of the big financial institutions, certainly prior to 2008, the esteem and knowledge is what they trade in. And there's always room, therefore, for the challenger has to come along and do the new and novel and be the innovative brand, and a way to migrate into that esteem and knowledge space over time, because that's where brand leaders live. And what the BAV guys told us about this was that they're starting to see change in their data, where the brands that are bringing the new news, that are the ones that are the innovators and are engaging in the new and novel, are increasingly the ones that are seen as the leader brands. So this kind of distinction we used to have between brand leaders and challengers in the old world is falling apart, and increasingly leadership starts to look like what challenger brands have historically done, which is to bring the new and novel into the world. And consumers are very smart about, one of the things that determines whether they say a brand is rising or falling, and as John uses this language of financial markets, whether I should short it or I'm long on it. I'm shorting brands these days who aren't bringing anything new and interesting to the category. And I'm long on those plucky upstarts that are bringing all the new stuff into the category, because we've trained the consumer markets across the piece now to expect the new. The pace of change in the marketplace is accelerating all the time. You have new companies emerging out of nowhere, like Airbnb, like Uber, that overnight can become leaders in their category because they're the ones that have changed the category. And that's not the way we've thought about this. That's not the way that the marketers have thought about this historically at all. They've thought of leader brands as the trusted, stable institutions that have been around for a long time and will endure. And the consumer saying, no, I don't see anything new from you. You're on your way out. And so it really argues for whether you want to or not. You kind of have to find new opportunities to re-energize a brand story, to be the innovator in the category. And, one particular way of thinking about that, it's not the only way, but is to think about what are the constraints. So, we talk in the book about T-Mobile, for example, in the world of cellular. So two big institutions dominate that market, Verizon, AT&T. And there's, a couple others. But everybody knows that that's the way it works. How do you break in to that monopoly, that duopoly? Well, T-Mobile's approach was to do the unreasonable thing. It calls itself the uncarrier, and it squares the circle. It takes ideas that historically we thought of as separate and never the twain shall meet. The idea that I can get the latest smartphone from a Samsung or an Apple historically has required me to sign up for a long-term relationship, a 3-year contract. And so those two things have tended to sit separately. T-Mobile came along and said, the way that we're going to change this category and grow our own market share is by talking about those two things at the same time. Yes, you can have access to the latest smartphone. No, you don't have to have a contract. They've brought change to the marketplace by offering the quote unquote unreasonable consumer demands. They've created solutions for them. So oftentimes you identify the really productive constraints that you face in a marketplace by asking unreasonable consumers, and there might be marginal people, it might be millennials with unreasonable expectations, it might be the real geeks in a category who want more from the category. What's the unreasonable request? Where are they? And that's potentially a source of innovation. There's always going to be constraints in there. It's costing T-Mobile a lot of money to offer the latest smartphone without a contract. But that's the way that they can make play catch up and change the rules of the category. So they're looking for the constraints as sources of inspiration and innovation, and how they can change their fortunes by addressing them.
You've been talking a lot about energy and the energy of brands and how people persevere and push through. Behind the facade of every expert and authority that I've met is a human being with their own kind of dark passages and vulnerabilities and struggles with their own energy. What are a couple of the biggest struggles that you've faced to date, and how have you been changed by them?
Wow, great question. All right, let's go there, shall we? So,
We're going to get a little personal here.
Okay, good. I'm up for it. So, I think any creative endeavor, including writing books and so on, the place where I suspect all of us get stuck, I know I got stuck, was, are we really saying anything new here? There's that doubt. And other people have written about this a lot. And, I was watching one of your other videos, actually, Charles, and somebody said something really good about it, which is, the mistake is to push back against that and deny it and squash it, because it just grows if it's denied. And I think using that voice of doubt when it creeps in and seeing it as an ally, what is it trying to tell me? What can I learn from it here that's going to be of value to this process is one. That's the dialogue that I had ongoing for the whole duration of writing this book. I think, the other thing that this is probably the most interesting thing for me. I've said this to a number of people, never publicly before, so I'll say it for the first time now, which is, in some ways, I got what I needed out of this book already. I mean, I would love, Adam and I were very clear when we were writing this book about we'd really like to influence as many people as we possibly can with this piece of work, because we think that being able to change the way the world feels about constraints, to see them as allies, is a really useful thing, valuable thing, particularly at this time. And maybe I'll come back and I'll end with that thought about, the state of the world at the moment. But the writing process for me, the experience of writing a book, which was, I got to tell you, it was hard. I mean, I'm not going to sort of deny how hard it was. And I had a very blue-collar relationship with this book, in the sense that the only way to get it done was not to sit on the park bench and wait for inspiration to strike, was to put my writing uniform on. So I wore the same black hoodie and black sailor's hat every day to the office. I got up at 5:30. I came downstairs and I wrote for 2 hours, and then I went back upstairs and got the family up and so on, and then dropped them off at school and went back. It was like, a lot of my roots historically are Sheffield steel workers, trade union people, went to the factory. So, I mean, I had that mentality, funnily enough, and I hadn't thought about them in years and years and years, but I had that mentality of, you get up, you go to the coalface, you get the job done, you work. And it's a kind of unromantic thing. It's not what I thought writing was going to be like, where you wait for the muse to strike and then prose flows effortlessly from the fingertips to the page. There were times when you hit the zone, when I hit the zone, when I had some flow going, when I was really engaged in a particular story and I'd met that person and I'd really connected with them and I'd understood their story and I really wanted to get it down on the page in a way that honored them and was true to that, and just told that story in the best light. But there were many times when it was about grinding out a result, as they call it in the world of soccer, where it was the hard work of just sitting down and doing it for 12 hours. I had this a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago. I sat down with a friend of my wife's, Dr. Bill Stewart, who's a local, he's a phenomenal doctor here, and he was writing his own book. And this is pre-book and pre-Mark wants to write a book. But he and I were talking about character. And he said, you know what character is, Mark? Character is deciding what it is you want and then waking up every day and making progress towards that goal. And we were talking about, that time in my life. I was just turning 40 and he was talking to me about, what it means to be a man and character and all the rest of it. And I just felt like the book writing process for me, the creative process for me, was exactly that, which is, I want to have this adventure and this experience of writing a book. boy, it's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And I was very fortunate to be aided and abetted by a guy who's written books before and knows what it's like. But I'm going to have to get up, and I'm going to have to dedicate, and I'm going to have to see it through to the end. And the journey was so rewarding to me that, in a sense, it doesn't matter whether this book's a success or not, because I got that experience out of it. And all those long nights of the soul, those times when you think you don't have anything original to say, that you can't write to save your life, that you're just repeating old truths and cliches. You have to deal with it all, and it's a fascinating experience. And it's nothing. I've never experienced anything quite like that before.
That's funny. I heard some years ago that the best book that an author can write is the book that they themselves need to read.
Yeah.
I thought if more people would take that to heart, we'd probably have some better books. Speaking of books, are there a couple of books that have affected or impacted you? You want to share those and possibly what caused them to make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, one of my favorite games to play with people is, what books have you read more than once?
Yes.
Right, because it's a very short list for me, and I'm slightly embarrassed to say that my books are sort of business books, because I wish there were works of fiction that I'd gone back to and poured over, and I, maybe will at some point in the future. It's not too late for that. But I loved Kevin Kelly's book, What Technology Wants. It's quite heady, it's quite dense, it's philosophical in places, it's spiritual in places, it's a history book. I had to read that twice because it was so rich. Bits and pieces of it found their way into our book. It certainly helped influence me as I was writing. So it wasn't a literal, oh, these ideas found their way into the book so much. But I think Kevin Kelly as a thinker is extraordinary, and I loved that book. And Stephen Johnson, I'm a huge fan of too. I don't know if you've read Where Good Ideas Come From. Oh
yes.
Had to read that one twice too. Just every page had a great insight on it, and the idea that we talk about in our book about accessing abundance, and the idea of the adjacent abundance, is an idea that he spoke about in his book. He didn't quite use that language for it, I don't think, but certainly got that idea from him. And it just again, being able to sort of, both of those books were useful because they provided the historical context for ideas and where they come from, and what an idea is, and where we seem to be going. So it just felt like the book we were writing needed to be aware of where ideas come from, to use Stephen Johnson's phrase. And hearing him, some of the stories he talked about, for example, to give you a sense of what I loved about that book, the coffee shops, the Vienna Circle, that period. Why was that such a rich period in history where Freudian psychology was being created, and movements in literature were being created? And it was the idea that people of very different disciplines and backgrounds would come together to meet at the coffee shop. So you've got this collision of ideas and perspectives, and diverse perspectives in there, fueled by caffeine, which fuels the conversation, which gives birth to new ideas. So ideas are having children, they're kind of like mating and creating progeny. And so that idea of that's how great ideas work. And come to be, I didn't think of this until just now, actually, but in some ways that can-if map, it puts a lot of diverse ideas and stories onto one page and says, look,
yes,
this is a summary of all kinds of different cases from all kinds of different categories. And if you can get your brand and your problem to start talking to these things and have the love child of the various different kind of solutions that are here, it's got to be different. It's got to be new and interesting and rich, but it's got to be born of stuff that's already worked somewhere else. So we know that this is good stuff that we're creating here. So, yeah, those are my two favorite books. I'm a big fan too of. I'll give a little shout out to David Whyte. Do you know his work?
I do not.
So he is a British poet. He's from Yorkshire, like I am. He's got an Irish mother, but he's a poet, and he's a very learned, knowledgeable about poetry. But he somehow manages to find a way to bring the insights that he learns from writing poetry and understanding the great poets to the world